one of the last Christmas Eves that he was alive, and I was in grad school. He called me with my grandmother on the phone and told me that they were just going to go ahead and give me the old Porsche. And so that was a pretty incredible surprise, and that meant a lot to me. My grandfather in 1972 turned 50 years old along with his best friend, and they were both Army guys and had businesses and had just been buddies their whole lives, and they decided for their 50th birthday they were going to go buy Porsches, and they both bought 914s that year. Throughout its life, they totally used the car. This was not a garage queen by any means. He and my grandmother used to take road trips to Montana to go skiing in it. Sun Valley, they drove it to California once to watch the Rose Bowl, to Western Washington to Husky games several times. So the car was definitely used, but not driven to death. When I found the car in his garage, it had been covered and not driven for about 6 years. And it was covered with stuff that he had just put on there for storage, and he didn't even know there was a Porsche in his garage. So when I found it, I was pretty excited to see the condition that it was in, which was barely running, but the body was straight, it was in great shape, just dirty, and clearly needed to be driven. So I started talking to him about, what are we going to do about the Porsche, and what's the fate of the Porsche, how is it, and he would, play it kind of cool and not really let on that he was going to give it to me ever. But I think maybe he knew that the whole time it would be my car. I think that he saw what I was doing with my life, that I was independent and I was working really hard to build something for myself. I think that sort of gave him comfort that I was the one that could handle the car. And I think that he saw in me something of himself as well. And so it seemed like a good fit that I might be the one to carry on that tradition of owning the Porsche. So then when I got the car, the first thing I wanted to do was make sure that mechanically it was sound and take care of the car, but I didn't want to do it in a way that changed the history. I wanted the car to stay as original as possible, as period correct as possible, but I wanted to drive it, and I wanted to use the car because that's what he would have done, and that's what he wanted. So most of the Porsche 914s that you see were 4 cylinders, and now most of the Porsches that you see are 1.8 or 2-liter models. But the 1972 had the 1.7 liter or the 6-cylinder, and my grandfather wasn't interested in the 6-cylinder, so he bought the 1.7 liter. The Porsche 914 was conceived in 1969, and at the time, Volkswagen had Porsche doing all of their development work, and they had a contract for a certain number of cars to be developed. And the very end of the contract, they still had one car left on that deal that they wanted Porsche to develop, and they decided that the 914 would be that car. So it was a Volkswagen idea, it was a Volkswagen concept that Porsche designed, and the idea behind it was to replace the Porsche 912 as well as the Karmann Ghia at the time. So Porsche designed the 914 as its first mid-engine car and really introduced it full-fledged in 1970. There are 1969 models available, but 1970 was really the first year that you could get a 914 and import it into the US. The car puts out about 74 horsepower at 4,900 RPMs, so it's not a speed demon. It has more of a go-kart feel, very interactive feel, and firm to drive. Definitely a classic Porsche. So driving this car is a lot of fun. It's actually one of the most fun cars I've ever driven. And the reason it's so fun is it's very intentional to drive. You have to be very purposeful with everything you do. And that's because the brakes definitely feel like old car brakes. It takes a long time to stop this car. The linkage is way in the back of the car. So you have like 7 feet or 6 feet of linkage between the stick and where the transmission actually engages. So it's really sloppy to shift. It's not a power steering car. It has a big old, thin steering wheel that requires a lot of muscle to crank around. But also because of that, you really feel connected to the road. It's very low to the ground. The suspension is very stiff. So you feel a lot of the bumps, but you also feel very nimble and very agile. It's not a really fast car, but it moves very quickly. It won't have a very high top speed, and you're not going to drag race anybody, but it's a nimble car. The sound of the engine coming from right behind you, having that mid-engine feel is pretty unique. Revving the engine, it's got a real nice sort of a throaty V-dub sound. And Grandpa put glass packs on it when he bought it, so it's got even a little more noise that comes out than a typical 914. I kind of like that. Things I always think about is getting in this car after driving my newer car is, I'm not going to drive this at 2,000 RPMs. I need to drive this around 3,000 RPMs. And the engine loves it. It feels better at a high RPM. My favorite part of the car, I think, is the cornering. Because it's a mid-engine car and the weight balance is almost 50-50 across the front and back, it corners like a dream, and it just sort of pivots. And so you really feel like you're driving sort of a grown-up go-kart. There's a lot of things about driving it that are rewarding for me. One of the most rewarding things is sort of the feeling like I'm keeping Grandpa alive in a way. I think he would appreciate the fact that the car is still running so well, and I can take it out any day and drive it for 4 or 5 hours and it probably will be fine. Just knowing that I have a piece of history and that I was in a position in my life to be able to take a car that was well on a road to not having any sort of a future and salvage it and have the work done on it and rebuild it to what it is now. I take a lot of pride in that. And that makes me feel good, and I think my grandfather and my family appreciate that. It's really important that I was able to keep Grandpa's legacy alive. My grandfather bought this car specifically for a reason. It was important to him, and it was for a special occasion. And I feel really proud that I was able to get the car and have it maintained and rebuilt in a way that it's going to last as long as I want it to. And I think he'd be really proud about that. I think that's something that he would find really satisfying, and he'd be proud of me for doing that. My name is Aaron Moss, and I drive a 1972 Porsche 914.